The quiet that raised you. Some wounds never bleed. They don't bruise the skin. They quiet the voice, dim the eyes, soften the way someone asks for love without ever really asking. Emotional neglect leaves no scars anyone can see, yet it shapes everything. How safe closeness feels, how loud silence becomes, how easily a person disappears inside their own life. This is not a story about cruelty. It is a story about absence, and what the heart learns to do when no one notices it's there. There is a particular kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It can happen in a full house, at a crowded table, in the middle of a conversation with someone who loves you. It is the loneliness of being physically present but emotionally unmet, of learning, early and quietly, that your inner world was something to manage by yourself. This is the first sign, not a memory of shouting or abandonment, but a memory of stillness. A parent who fed you, clothed you, showed up to every school event, and yet never once asked what you were feeling. Not because they didn't love you, because no one ever taught them how to look. Invisible emotional neglect rarely announces itself. It doesn't leave visible wounds. It leaves absences, a missing sentence, a missing question, a missing pause where someone should have noticed you were struggling. And because nothing bad technically happened, the mind rarely names it as harm. Instead, it becomes background noise, a subtle, persistent hum beneath the surface of daily life. The second sign lives in the body before it reaches the mind. A tightness in the chest when asking for help, a reflex to say, "I'm fine," before the sentence is even finished. A quiet, almost automatic instinct to shrink your needs down to a size that won't inconvenience anyone. This isn't weakness. It is training. Years of learning that emotional expression was met with distraction, dismissal, or silence, until the nervous system simply stopped offering it up. The third sign is harder to see, because it looks like independence. People who were emotionally neglected often become remarkably self-sufficient. They don't ask for much. They rarely lean on others. They are described as low maintenance, easygoing, so mature for their age. What looks like strength is often something else entirely. A child who learned no one was coming, so they stopped calling out. The fourth sign shows up in relationships, in the quiet confusion of feeling lonely even while loved. A partner who is kind, attentive, present, and still, somehow, it doesn't land, because the body was never taught how to receive care. It only learned how to survive without it. And the fifth sign is perhaps the most disorienting, not knowing what you feel at all. Ask a person shaped by emotional neglect how they feel, and they may pause, not out of secrecy, but out of genuine uncertainty. The internal language for emotion was never modeled, so it was never learned. None of this means something was wrong with you. It means something was missing around you. And recognizing that missing piece, without blame, without judgment, is where healing quietly begins, where the silence began. To understand invisible neglect, it helps to release the image of neglect as failure. Most parents who emotionally neglect their children are not cruel. Many are exhausted, unaware, or simply repeating the only emotional language they were ever given. Neglect is rarely a decision. It is an inheritance. Picture a home that looked, from the outside, entirely functional. Meals were made, homework was checked, holidays were celebrated. But underneath that structure, there was an unspoken rule. Emotions were not discussed here, not because they were forbidden, but because no one knew how to hold them. A child crying was told to stop, not because their tears were wrong, but because the adult in the room didn't know what to do with tears at all. This is the quiet root of emotional neglect. Not malice, but a lack of emotional attunement. Attunement is the ability to sense another person's inner state and respond to it. A child who falls and scrapes their knee needs more than a bandage. They need someone to notice the fear in their eyes and meet it with steadiness. When that noticing doesn't happen, again and again, in small, ordinary moments, the child learns something enduring. My inner world is not something others respond to. Often, this pattern is generational. A parent who grew up unseen becomes a parent who does not know how to see. They love deeply, but love without attunement is like a lamp with no bulb. The intention to give light is there, but nothing actually illuminates the room. Their child grows up fed, sheltered, even praised, but emotionally, still in the dark. Sometimes the origin is circumstantial rather than relational. A parent grieving a loss, a household under financial strain, a family navigating illness or instability, where survival took priority over emotional depth. In these homes, neglect isn't born from indifference, but from depletion. There simply wasn't enough left over, after work, after worry, after simply making it through the day, to also tend to a child's inner world. Whatever its origin, the outcome is similar. A child adapts. They learn to read the room, anticipate needs, keep the peace, and shrink their own emotional volume until it barely registers, even to themselves. This adaptation is not a flaw, it is intelligence, a young mind doing exactly what it needed to do, in an environment that could not fully meet it. Understanding where the silence began does not excuse it, but it does something more useful. It removes shame from the equation and replaces it with context. And context is where compassion, for the people who raised you and for the child you once were, quietly begins to take root. The mind's quiet adaptation. Emotional neglect leaves its clearest fingerprints not in memory, but in the nervous system. Psychologists describe early relationships as the blueprint for something called attachment, the felt sense of whether the world is safe, whether needs will be met, whether reaching out leads to comfort or disappointment. When caregivers are consistently unattuned, children often develop what researchers call an avoidant or dismissive attachment style, a quiet, internalized belief that emotional needs are burdensome and safest when hidden. This isn't a character trait. It's a survival strategy encoded early, before language, before conscious memory. The developing brain is remarkably adaptive. If vulnerability was met with silence often enough, the brain begins to treat vulnerability itself as a threat. Over time, this creates a subtle but powerful pattern. Suppress first, feel later, if at all. Neuroscience adds another layer to this story. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, and the prefrontal cortex, responsible for emotional regulation, develop in relationship with early caregiving. When a child's distress is consistently met with attunement, a calm voice, a steady presence, the nervous system learns that big feelings are survivable and temporary. But when distress is met with silence or dismissal, the nervous system doesn't learn regulation. It learns suppression. The feelings don't disappear. They simply stop being expressed, even internally. This is why so many people who experienced emotional neglect struggle not with having emotions, but with locating them. Researchers sometimes describe this as alexithymia, difficulty identifying and describing one's own emotional states. It isn't emotional emptiness. It's an emotional vocabulary that was never given the chance to develop, because no one around them modeled it, named it, or asked about it enough for the child to learn the language themselves. There is also the matter of self-worth. Children build their sense of value largely through mirroring, seeing themselves reflected in the attentive gaze of a caregiver. When that mirror is foggy or absent, children often internalize a quiet, unspoken belief. I must not be worth noticing, not because anyone said this aloud, but because the silence itself became the message. None of this is destiny. The brain that adapted to neglect is the same brain capable of adapting toward connection, given new experiences of being seen. This is the essence of neuroplasticity, the mind's lifelong capacity to reshape itself in response to safety, attunement, and repetition. The nervous system that learned to go quiet can, slowly and patiently, learn to speak again. Understanding this is not about diagnosing yourself. It's about recognizing that what feels like a personal flaw, the difficulty asking for help, the confusion around your own emotions, is in fact a deeply logical response to an environment that didn't yet know how to listen. Learning to hear yourself again, healing from something invisible, begins with an act that sounds almost too simple: naming it. For years, the ache had no language. It felt like restlessness, or numbness, or an unexplained exhaustion in relationships that should have felt easy. The moment a person can say, quietly and without drama, "I experienced emotional neglect," something shifts. The fog gets an edge. The formless finally has a shape. This naming is not about blame. It is about accuracy. A person cannot repair what they cannot see clearly, and for most of their life, this particular wound was disguised as personality, as being too independent, too private, too calm in a crisis. Healing begins the moment that story is gently rewritten, not a personality trait, but an adaptation, not a flaw, but a scar with a story behind it. The next shift is subtler and slower. It is learning to notice, in real time, the moment a need arises and gets automatically minimized. A wave of sadness, quickly swallowed. A request for help, quietly withdrawn before it's even spoken. Healing asks a person to pause in that exact moment and ask a new question. What do I actually feel right now? And is it safe to let that exist, even for a few seconds, without shrinking it? This is where self-attunement begins, the internal version of what was missing externally. It doesn't require grand gestures. It can be as small as noticing tension in the shoulders and asking what emotion might be living there. As simple as sitting with a feeling for 60 extra seconds instead of rushing to fix, dismiss, or explain it away. Relationships often become the training ground for this new skill. For the first time, a person may practice saying, "I'm actually not okay," to someone who stays instead of retreating. This can feel disproportionately terrifying, not because the fear is irrational, but because it is old. It is the echo of every time vulnerability once met silence. Each time it is met instead with steadiness, the nervous system updates, slowly, the way trust always rebuilds, not in leaps, but in repetitions. Professional support, therapy, particularly approaches that focus on attachment and emotional regulation, often becomes a vital mirror in this process, offering the attuned presence that was missing in earlier years. But healing also happens in smaller, everyday moments. Journaling a feeling, instead of dismissing it. Letting a friend sit with your sadness, instead of performing composure. Allowing rest, without needing to earn it first. None of this erases the years of silence. But it does something quietly powerful. It teaches the nervous system a new sentence, one it never got to hear early enough. You are allowed to be noticed, starting with yourself. What was always there? There is a strange kind of grief in realizing you were lonely long before you had a word for it. But there is also, quietly, a kind of relief, because a named ache can finally be tended to. The child who learned to go silent did nothing wrong. They adapted, with astonishing intelligence, to a world that hadn't yet learned how to meet them. And the adult, who now sits with this awareness, is not broken. They are simply, for the first time, being asked to notice what was overlooked for far too long. Healing does not mean becoming a different person. It means slowly returning to the one who was always there, underneath the composure, underneath the self-sufficiency, underneath the practiced ease of never needing anything from anyone. That person did not vanish. They were only waiting, patiently, in the quiet. Perhaps this is the gentlest truth of all. You do not have to earn the right to be seen. You do not have to perform wellness to deserve attention, or minimize your feelings to remain lovable. The parts of you that learn to stay quiet are not flaws to fix. They are simply parts that have been waiting for a long time to finally be heard. And maybe healing isn't about becoming whole in some dramatic, final sense. Maybe it is smaller than that and steadier. It is the quiet decision, made again and again, to listen. To your own tiredness, your own sadness, your own unspoken needs, the way you once wished someone would. The silence that raised you does not have to be the silence that keeps you. It can be met, slowly, with a different kind of presence, your own. And in that presence, something long unseen finally, gently, comes into view.